I was the most favored concubine of the crown prince. Though my origins were humble, I was cherished by him like a pearl in his palm, and I was the mother of his only child. Watching the father and son sleeping soundly side by side, I sighed, convinced that my greatest blessings were still yet to come. Suddenly, my son's eyes flew open. "Mother, I've been reborn. In 3 months, father will raise an army to seize the throne, and the first person he'll kill will be you." What nonsense, was the child muttering in his sleep. Helplessly, I tried to tuck the small hand clutching my sleeve back under the quilt, but it wouldn't budge. "Mother, mother, I missed you so much." His voice was as weak as that of a long-ill man, yet he clung to me for dear life. The innocent, playful boy who had gone to bed just moments ago now looked as if he'd suffered a terrible fright. His lips trembled, and his eyes were bloodshot, afraid of waking the crown prince Chi-Ku, who rested beside us. I quickly gestured for Yuana to be quiet before picking him up and carrying him out of the bedroom. "Mother, every word I say is true." Before I could even step over the threshold, Yuana hurried to explain, his words tumbling out in the broken speech of a 2-year-old. I listened patiently for a long while before finally piecing together his meaning. He said that in 3 months, Chi-Ku would stage a coup d'etat, and that very night, I would turn into a cold corpse. "I hid behind the rockery and watched father walk out of your room. They carried you away, your face purple and blue, blood trickling from your nose and mouth. A few days later, we moved into the imperial palace. They told me to call father imperial father, and forbade me from ever mentioning you again." Yuana spoke each word slowly and clearly, afraid that I wouldn't believe him. Of course I didn't. Everyone knew that the crown prince and crown princess were estranged in all but name. The true favorite of the Eastern Palace was I, Ziyun, a concubine he'd met in the mortal world long before he'd ascended to his high station. Though my rank was low, Chi-Ku doted on me endlessly, showering me with luxuries that rivaled even those of the crown princess herself. How could he possibly kill me? But Yuana paid no heed to my doubts, continuing his tale. "But imperial father changed. He rarely came to see me anymore. Then I fell ill, a terrible, terrible illness." My heart skipped a beat. No mother in the world could hear her child speak of sickness without feeling a pang of anxiety. Even if it was just a dream, I found myself asking, almost without thinking, "You were ill. Where was your father? Did he not summon the imperial physicians to treat you?" He hung his head, his voice growing even more dejected. Imperial father and the imperial physicians were all in the noble consort's palace. I heard she was going to give birth to a little brother for me. Noble consort. In the Eastern Palace, there were only 2 women of any consequence, the crown princess and me. The crown princess was destined to be the future empress. So who was this noble consort? "Is this noble consort someone from the palace?" I pressed. But Yuana only shook his head, his small face creased with confusion. "The nanny covered my mouth to stop me from calling for you. But I was so cold, I couldn't help it," he mumbled, clinging tightly to my neck, his little hands icy cold. "And as I called and called, I really saw you." A sharp ache pricked at my nose. I stroked his back gently, murmuring comforting words over and over. "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. You were just having a nightmare. Everything is fine now." I laid the tear-stained Yuana back down in his small bed. But an inexplicable sense of unease lingered in my chest. Yet when my eyes fell on the pearl hair ornaments laid out on the table, I laughed at my own foolishness. Chiding myself for being so unnecessarily paranoid. Those hair ornaments had been a gift from the imperial palace, a gift that, by all rights, should have gone to the crown princess. But Chi-Ku had simply waved a hand and said, "Eastern pearls are bright and vivid, they suit Ziyun far better." Before ordering them to be delivered straight to my chambers, Chi-Ku doted on Yuana just as fiercely as he doted on me. The father and son were inseparable, craving each other's company every waking moment. Talk of poisonings and untimely deaths, it was nothing more than the nonsensical ramblings of a child in a dream. I climbed back into bed beside Chi-Ku, but try as I might, sleep eluded me. In the hazy twilight between wakefulness and slumber, the faint murmur of voices drifted in from the outer hall. I jolted fully awake, reaching out to touch the space beside me. It was empty. "Your Highness." The dead soldiers have all been recruited and are stationed outside the military camp on the outskirts of the capital. I am still working to bribe the imperial guards," came the voice of Han Li, the commander of the Eastern Palace Guards. "How much longer will it take?" Chiku asked. "About 3 months," Han Li replied, pausing for a moment before adding, "Forgive me for speaking bluntly, Your Highness. The Crown Princess's father is Duke Su, who holds the military power of the entire nation in his hands. Why do you refuse to seek his aid, choosing instead to risk everything by raising private soldiers and bribing the imperial guards?" After a long, tense silence, Chiku let out a soft, cold laugh. "Have you ever stopped to think? What if the Duke of Su, whose family has been loyal to the throne for 3 generations, refuses to join my cause?" By the time Chiku returned to the bedroom, my back was soaked with cold sweat. "Ziyun," he called softly, his voice warm with affection, "your eyelashes are fluttering like butterfly wings. Did I wake you?" I rubbed my eyes, feigning grogginess as I pouted playfully. "Your Highness is covered in the chill of the night. How could I possibly sleep through that?" Chika's long arm snaked around my waist, pulling me into his embrace. "Then warm me up," he murmured, burying his face in the crook of my neck, his cool nose nuzzling my skin like a mischievous little beast. The room was filled with tender intimacy, just like every other night we'd shared together. As my name Ziyun, Purple Cloud, suggests, I was no daughter of a noble house. I had once been a singing girl on the banks of the Xuanyang River. On the orders of the madam of the brothel, I'd boarded a luxurious pleasure boat filled with distinguished guests, intent on serving them with all the grace and charm I possessed. I'd never intended to be a hero when I'd thrown myself forward that day. It had been for no nobler reason than to grab the jade Rui scepter held by the governor of Xuanyang, a prize promised to whoever could seize it first. It was only later that I'd learned the elegant young man I'd saved from the stray arrow was none other than the heir to the throne of the entire nation, the Crown Prince. I'd exclaimed in disbelief, sipping the medicinal soup he'd personally spoon-fed me. "Who would dare to assassinate the Crown Prince? Surely you don't think my brothers are content to let me inherit the throne without a fight?" Chiku had replied, setting down the medicine bowl, his eyes cold and hard as ice. "Blood ties mean nothing in the imperial family. Even a lowly singing girl from the riverbanks has more kindness in her heart than any of them." I'd snuck a guilty glance at him, my heart soaring with joy at my incredible stroke of luck. If it weren't for Yuana's nightmare, I would never have tossed and turned in bed that night, and if I hadn't tossed and turned, I would never have heard that conversation between him and Han Li. But the conversation had matched Yuana's words too perfectly for comfort. 4 days afterward, I put on a brave face, pretending nothing was wrong, but deep down, my heart was in turmoil. Thankfully, Yuana was still just a small child. His worries quickly forgotten as he returned to his usual games and frolics. "Miss Ziyun," the shrill cry of my maid Baoyang jolted me out of my reverie, making me stumble forward a step. "The little prince has offended the Crown Princess. You must come quickly. Next month, Chiku's beloved mentor, Old Master Shui, would be returning to the capital after years of exile. The Crown Prince planned to host a grand banquet at the Eastern Palace to welcome his old teacher and his family." The Crown Princess had been busy for days preparing for the feast. Yuana had always been obedient, treating his stepmother with careful respect, keeping his distance as I'd taught him to. How could he have possibly offended her? I rushed to the garden, only to find Yuana standing awkwardly, stammering out apologies, while the Crown Princess ignored him completely, bending over to inspect a row of wilting flower branches. "You children were playing ball without a care in the world. And look what you've done." The Crown Princess's personal maid Yueying, her round face stretched into a long, sour line, spotted me approaching and scowled even more fiercely. "These jade orchids have been tended to personally by Her Highness for months, meant as a gift for the ladies of the Shui family. Miss Ziyun, how convenient that you've arrived just in time. Could this perhaps be a scheme cooked up by you and your son? His Highness has forbidden you from attending the family banquet. If you're unhappy about it, you should take it up with him. Her Highness adores these orchids. How dare you take your anger out on them?" Yueying planted her hands on her hips, emphasizing the words family banquet with a sneer. She truly believed I was making trouble out of spite, and who could blame her? Chi-Ku had never made any secret of his preference for me. He'd taken me to countless events where concubines were not welcome, flaunting our relationship for all to see. But this time was different. "Why won't you let Yuana and me attend?" I'd asked him, laughing it off as a joke, pretending to be upset. "After all, it was thanks to old Master Xue that I first met your highness." A flicker of irritation crossed Chi-Ku's face. He closed the poetry collection he'd been reading, his expression smoothing back into its usual calm composure. "My mentor once served as the grand tutor to the emperor. His family and the Yi family, your stepmother's family, have been close friends for generations. I fear their presence at the banquet would make things awkward for you and Yuana." The webs of connection between the noble families of the capital were as old and tangled as ancient tree roots. I was a mere blade of duckweed, adrift in the currents of fate, loved by the crown prince, yes, but forever an outsider to this world of privilege and power. As a former singing girl, I had long since learned to read the room, to hear the unspoken words behind every polite phrase, so I'd nodded my head obediently, agreeing without a second thought. But in truth, I couldn't help but think of all that had led us here. Chi-Ku was the legitimate son of the empress. Yet he had never been the emperor's favorite. After the empress passed away, old Master Xue, then the crown prince's grand tutor, had become his only ally, and thus the target of every other prince's jealousy and malice. It hadn't taken long for old Master Xue to be framed on a trivial charge, stripped of his official position, and exiled from the capital in disgrace. Chi-Ku had spoken out in his mentor's defense, his words angering the emperor so greatly that he'd been stripped of his authority to oversee state affairs and sent to govern the remote region of Xuanyang, a place notorious for its unruly officials and endless troubles. It was called an opportunity for training, but everyone knew the truth. It was nothing more than a ploy to give Chi-Ku enough rope to hang himself, to find an excuse to depose the legitimate heir and replace him with a son of the emperor's choosing. That arrow that had pierced my right shoulder all those years ago, it had undoubtedly been fired by one of his brothers. Grown impatient with waiting and willing to risk everything for a chance at the throne, during those dark days in Xuanyang, Chi-Ku had lived in constant fear, seeing enemies in every shadow. It was only when he held me in his arms at night that he could finally find peace enough to sleep. Then, when spring came, Han Li had burst into our residence, his face alight with joy. "Duke Su says his only daughter has taken a liking to your highness. The emperor has already granted the marriage. We can return to the capital at last." I'd heard Chi-Ku speak of the Yi family before, how they had led armies for generations, their military achievements unmatched. He'd once joked that if Duke Su had a son, the man would be powerful enough to make even the emperor himself tremble on his throne. With the Yi family's support, the position of crown prince would be his for good. The Eastern Palace would never belong to another. But Chi-Ku's face had not shown the relief I'd expected. Instead, he'd stood with his hands behind his back, staring out at the distant mountains, forcing a bitter laugh. "Duke Su certainly knows how to pick his moment. A friend in need is a friend indeed, also that I will be indebted to him for the rest of my life." But did anyone ever stop to ask for my opinion? Han Li had hesitated for a moment, his voice cautious. "Your Highness, what of Miss Ziyun? When you return to the capital for the wedding, will you take her with you?" I'd been standing outside the door, about to enter and tell Chi-Ku the happy news of my pregnancy, 2 months along, at long last, but those words had stopped me in my tracks. My breath catching in my throat, I'd watched my chance at freedom, at legitimacy, slip through my fingers, and in that moment, I'd made a choice. Stepping into the hall, I'd dropped to my knees, my voice trembling with feigned sorrow. "I, Ziyun, know full well that I am lowly born and undeserving of such great fortune. But I carry your highness's child in my womb. I ask for nothing more than to stay by your side. I am willing to be your servant, to wait upon you and your lawful wife for the rest of my days." Chi-Ku had ignored the urgent, warning glances Han Li sent his way. He'd reached out a hand, lifting me gently to my feet. "Foolish girl," he'd said softly, brushing away the tears I'd carefully arranged to fall down my cheeks. "My marriage to Lady Yi is nothing more than a political alliance. You need never bow to her. But beneath his tender words, I'd caught a flash of coldness, a glint of something that had made my heart ache, even then, and Chiku had kept his promise. After we returned to the capital, his love for me had remained as strong as ever, so strong, in fact, that rumors had spread throughout the palace, branding him a man who doted on his concubine and neglected his wife. At first, I'd lived in constant fear of the crown princess Yi Qingxuang, certain that she would make my life a living hell, but to my surprise, the noble lady had shown nothing but grace and forbearance, leaving me in peace all these years. But these jade orchids must have meant a great deal to her. She was always so composed, so elegant, like a figure straight out of a classical painting, yet now, her brows were furrowed tightly, beads of sweat dotting her forehead. Knowing that we were in the wrong, I spoke up timidly. How many of your orchids did Yuana damage? I will send someone to buy new ones at once. Yuying cut me off with a disdainful glare. Each jade orchid is worth 100 taels of gold. What's more, these are tribute flowers from Nanju. You'd be lucky to find them for sale at any price. I turned to Baoyang, my voice calm and decisive. Take that set of Eastern pearl hair ornaments, have them appraised and sold for silver. Then give the money to Aunt Li in the kitchen. Tell her to get this done immediately. Baoyang stared at me in confusion. I nudged her gently, a hint of a smile playing on my lips. Did you not complain just the other day that Aunt Li's younger brother is a flower grower, that he's been begging her to help him secure the contract to supply flowers for the Eastern Palace? Realization dawned on Baoyan's face. She slapped her forehead, grinning. Right, how thoughtful of you to remember that, miss. Yi Qingxuang lifted her eyes, studying me carefully. Seeing that I was not acting out of mere politeness, the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She counted the damaged orchids slowly, then spoke, her voice cool but not unkind. Very well, 6 plants. I quickly curtsied, feeling as if I'd been granted a royal pardon, and dragged the dejected Yuana away. He looked like an eggplant beaten by frost. I pressed the Eastern pearl hair ornaments into Baoyan's hands, but she just stood there, dumbfounded. I thought the crown princess would make a huge fuss over this. That's it. Are your eyes just for show? I shot back, pinching the culprit Yuana hard as my heart ached at the thought of the valuable hair ornaments I'd just given away. She was only worried about her orchids. She didn't even spare me a second glance. Baoyang tucked the hair ornaments away, pursing her lips. Everyone says the crown prince doesn't care for the crown princess, but from where I stand, she doesn't seem too fond of him either. I quickly pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her. Right, don't gossip about master and mistress, don't stir up trouble. Baoyang parroted the words I always nagged her with, then lifted the curtain and stepped out of the room. The crown prince doted on his concubine. The crown princess bore it with grace. If it weren't for Yuana's bizarre words, I would truly have believed I'd been blessed with luck beyond measure earned through lifetimes of good deeds. Yuana's cheeks were flushed from my pinch. He blinked back tears, snuggling up to me. Mother, I won't go near those flowers again. Please don't ever abandon me, silly boy. I pulled him into a tight hug, a surge of resolve rising within me amid the days of fear and uncertainty, rebirth, nightmare, whatever it was. I had heard with my own ears that he planned to stage a coup in 3 months. I couldn't control the outcome of that, but no one was going to take me and my son's lives amid the chaos. But why would Chiku kill me? Could it have something to do with that noble consort? I tossed and turned the question over in my mind, but came up with no answers. The Xue family had only been allowed to return to the capital under the pretense of seeking medical treatment. No sooner had they entered the city than Chiku had personally escorted them back to the Eastern Palace. I kept Yuana company in the study, keeping a low profile and not daring to crash the party. I pulled out a collection of poetry that Chiku often carried with him, about to open it, when the sound of footsteps approached from outside the window. It was Yi Qingxuang, leading the Xue family to see her precious jade orchids. Yuana and I huddled by the window, peeking out cautiously. Chiku had his left arm around old Master Xue, while walking side by side with the eldest son of the Xue family and his wife. The couple chatted and laughed with Chiku, clearly on familiar terms. Yi Qingxuang followed behind, holding the hand of the Xue family's young lady, chatting animatedly with her. Sigh. Children of noble families almost always grew up together, bound by friendship from childhood. It really was a pity for Yuana to have a mother with no family background to speak of. Suddenly, Yuana darted around behind me, clinging tightly to my legs. The noble consort is here. My hand slipped, and a yellowed paper-cut portrait fluttered out of the poetry collection, drifting gently to the floor. The woman in the portrait was the spitting image of the young lady laughing and talking outside the window. 18 days had passed since the Shui family had moved into the palace, 18 days, and I hadn't seen Chiku once. Even Baoyang had started muttering to herself, saying that even if old Master Shui had once been Chiku's mentor and benefactor, there was no need for him to spend every waking moment at the man's side. I embroidered Yuana's undergarments absently, but my ears kept replaying the words I'd overheard 2 days ago, refusing to let me forget them. With Chiku ignoring me for so long, Baoyang was even more anxious than I was. She'd insisted on pushing me to go deliver ginseng soup to him. My poor girl. Why are you so clever one minute and so foolish the next? She dragged me away from Yuana's bedside, shoving a food box into my hands. What good will it do you to spend all your time cooped up with the child? The crown prince's favor is your only lifeline. One day, he'll have a harem full of concubines. If you don't fight for the title of secondary consort now, you'll end up old and forgotten before you know it. I clutched the food box. Hesitating outside the door of the Qingjing Pavilion, Chiku's private study and office. Chiku had always hated being disturbed while handling state affairs. Hardly any servants were posted outside the pavilion to wait on him. But that portrait had been burning a hole in my mind, like a ghostly flame. I needed answers, desperately. Squeak, a window lattice creaked open. I ducked behind a pillar, my heart pounding like a thief's. Inside the room, Chiku let out a long, contented sigh. Elan, every single day and night. I wish that the woman standing before me was you. Through the crack in the window, I watched as Chiku twirled a strand of hair around his fingers, his voice soft with longing. You've known me since we were children. How could you not understand my heart? My marriage to Lady Yi was nothing but a scheme to secure my position as crown prince, to pave the way for me to ascend the throne, to clear my mentor's name of false charges, and to bring you back to the capital at last. The woman sitting on Chiku's lap looked up at him. Her eyes misty with tears, her lips swollen like ripe cherries. It was her, the noble consort Yuana had pointed out, Shui Ilan, the young lady of the Shui family. I felt as if a heavy hammer had struck me on the head. My hands trembled so violently, I almost dropped the food box. Could it be that Yuana's rebirth hadn't been just the nonsensical ramblings of a child, that Chiku had been carrying on an affair with Shui Ilan all along? That was why he'd made her a noble consort the moment he'd seized the throne. But what did that have to do with me? Shui Ilan sniffled, her voice trembling. But I'm afraid you'll grow to love her for real, that you'll forget about Ilan, suffering in that bitter cold wasteland. She pounded Chiku's chest lightly with her fist, pouting. Brother Ku, that remote backwater is no place for a human being to live. I couldn't stand it for a single day longer. Chiku caught her hand. His voice growing serious. Don't worry, I already have a plan. Once everything is done, I'll welcome you into the palace with great fanfare and honor. You're just trying to sweet-talk me, Shui Ilan murmured, snuggling into his arms. I've also heard rumors that there's a concubine in the Eastern Palace whom you dote on endlessly. Chiku stiffened, his lips pursing into a thin line. She's nothing but a singing girl. I keep her around like one might feed a stray cat or dog. You have no need to concern yourself with her. I originally took her in to spite Lady Yi. First, it would prevent Duke Su from thinking I'm an easy target to manipulate and demand favors from. Second, if Lady Yi were to fly into a jealous rage because of her, especially since she has no children of her own, I could depose her as empress in the future, and no official in the court would dare to say a single word against it. Shui Ilan gasped, her face turning pale with shock. Depose her as empress? Wouldn't that be too cruel to Sister Yi? Chiku tapped her nose lightly, laughing softly. You're always so kind-hearted. I almost forgot you and Lady Yi have been good friends since childhood. But if my mentor hadn't been exiled because of me, The position of crown princess would have been yours from the very start. Besides, Lady Yi has the powerful Duke Su, who commands the entire imperial army, standing behind her. I have no desire to spend my entire life being controlled by others, like my father did. When the time comes, I will definitely take back control of the military from the Yi family. My heart turned to ice as I listened, a cold chill spreading through my veins. Earlier, Yuana had only told me that after he'd moved into the imperial palace with Chi Ku, he'd never seen his stepmother again. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Yi Qingshuang and I had never been close. As the daughter of a powerful duke and the future empress of the nation, why would she have bothered with a mere concubine's son? But now, it was clear that by then, Yi Qingshuang had already been fighting to save her own life. My sudden, violent death had most likely been the first step in Chi Ku's plot to frame her and the entire Yi family. I stumbled back to the west courtyard, bursting into Yuana's room and yanking him out of bed. He'd just fallen asleep. In your dream. What happened to the crown princess later? He blinked sleepily, repeating the same story he'd told me before. Before you died, stepmother had already been locked up. Pressed by my relentless questions, Yuana seemed to remember something else, his eyes widening with the memory. Later, imperial father said she was jealous and vicious, that she'd killed people with her own hands. He said he would never see her again. He also said that once the noble consort gave birth to a son or daughter, he would make her the new empress. So it was true. I clung to the bedpost for support, barely able to stand. I had always known that Chi Ku and I were as different as the clouds in the sky and the mud on the ground, worlds apart. I also understood exactly what he'd meant by launching the plan in 3 months. The crown prince was afraid of delays and changing fortunes. He planned to raise an army and seize the throne, a crime of treason that would either make him emperor or condemn his entire family to death. Even so, I had never once considered reporting him to the authorities or running away. I had never dared to hope for a marriage of equals with him. But he had rescued me from a life of degradation, had given Yuana a life of luxury and privilege. I had thought that at the very least, we should share in each other's fortunes, for better or for worse. How ridiculous. I had thought I'd met a benefactor, that my greatest blessings were still ahead of me. But from the very beginning, I had been nothing more than a pawn in his game, a pawn he had always intended to discard. The carved railings and jade-paved paths of the west courtyard suddenly felt like a giant spider's web, closing in on me from all sides. I couldn't help but shiver, a single thought echoing in my mind: run, should I run? But I had been sheltered and pampered in the Eastern Palace for so long that I didn't even know which way the city gates opened. Taking Yuana with me would be like trying to escape with wings clipped. Impossible. Besides, I'd had no home to call my own since the day my father had sold me to the brothel. Where would I even go? If I didn't run, could I possibly change my fate? But behind this fate lay the treacherous schemes of the imperial court, the deadly power struggles of the nobility. I had learned to read and write from obscene poems and songs. Apart from being beautiful and having a sweet voice, apart from knowing how to charm and amuse men, what other skills did I possess? Should I try to curry favor with Chi Ku again, to beg for even a shred of his pity? But my life was worth nothing to him. Using my death to pin the false charge of being a jealous, vicious woman who'd murdered her husband's favorite concubine on the Yi family's only daughter would be the perfect move. He had no reason at all to spare me. Ouch. The embroidery needle pricked my finger, jolting me back to my senses. Baoyan's urgent voice grew louder and louder, coming closer. Miss Ziyun, stop daydreaming. The crown princess has sent for you. She wants you to come pay your respects. On the night of Chi Ku and Yi Qingshuang's wedding, Chi Ku had spent the night in my chambers. The next day, he had personally excused me from the duty of paying my respects to the crown princess and offering her tea, a ritual all concubines were required to perform. At the time, I had been overwhelmed with gratitude, thinking it was a sign of his great favor. Little did I know that I had been nothing more than bait on a fishing hook, carefully placed there to lure Yi Qingshuang into a jealous rage. But Yi Qingshuang had agreed to his arrangement without hesitation, choosing to live in peace with me ever since, never interfering in my life. Why, then, was she suddenly summoning me to pay my respects now? My heart filled with unease as I made my way to the east courtyard, a place I had never set foot in before. Before I even reached the main hall, I heard a shrill, haughty voice ringing out. What an arrogant little concubine! How dare she disrespect the crown princess by refusing to come pay her respects all this time? Xuerilan sat upright on the main seat in the hall, acting as if she were the true mistress of the Eastern Palace. Sister Yi is far too kind-hearted, letting herself be bullied like this. Today, I'm going to get justice for her. The maids and servants of the East Courtyard exchanged uneasy glances. Yuying stepped forward, her voice hesitant. It was His Highness who excused her from this duty. Miss, he said she didn't need to go through the empty formalities. As she was carrying the Crown Prince's firstborn son, the Crown Princess also forbade us from complaining about it. Xuerilan let out a cold snort, her eyes narrowing with disdain. How can a woman of her lowly birth be fit to raise the Crown Prince's eldest son? In my opinion, the child should be taken away from her and placed under Sister Yi's care instead. Stop standing there like a statue, she snapped, catching sight of me standing in the doorway out of the corner of her eye. Her tone growing even more imperious. Today is the anniversary of the late Empress's death. The Crown Prince and Sister Yi entered the palace early this morning to pay their respects. No one is here to see your pitiful little act. The sun is shining brightly. You will stand in the courtyard for 3 hours to learn your place. And while you're at it, think long and hard about how a concubine ought to serve her mistress. Yuying's eyes widened in alarm, her voice rising in panic. You can't do this, she's the apple of His Highness's eye. Slap. Xuerilan's face twisted with anger as she raised her hand and struck Yuying hard across the cheek. A mere singing girl from a brothel, how dare you call her the apple of his eye? My Xue family is one of the most prestigious noble families in the entire capital. I'll have you know I have every right to punish her. Yuying clutched her stinging cheek, tears welling up in her eyes as she tried to reason with her. I know you and the Crown Princess are like sisters, miss, but her life is already hard enough as it is. If His Highness finds out about this, he'll be furious. Xuerilan curled her lips into a sneer of contempt. All of you are nothing but cowards. That's why Sister Yi has been walked all over by a concubine who isn't even a legitimate member of this household. We're all in this together, master and servants alike. If Sister Yi is being bullied by the woman from the West Courtyard, none of you will benefit from it either. Several of the maids and servants nodded their heads in agreement, their gazes turning hostile as they looked at me. I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't accidentally overheard Chica's plot, I would have thought Xuerilan was doing this to defend Yi Qingshuang, and I would have resented the Crown Princess for it. The warm sunlight turned scorching hot as the hours passed. The courtyard was filled with orchids of every variety, their sweet fragrance growing cloying, making my head feel heavy and muddled. I dug my nails into my palm, fixing my gaze on a single spot in the distance, straining every muscle to stay upright, to keep from fainting right there in the Eastern Courtyard. The Eastern Courtyard was elegant and understated, its simplicity marred only by the sudden, playful paper cuts plastered all over the windows, goldfish, magpies, pairs of swallows. I squinted my eyes, studying the delicate cuts and patterns. There was something oddly familiar about them. Afraid that I would go running to the Crown Prince and exaggerate the whole incident, Yuying snuck over to fan me when no one was looking. I heard the Crown Princess grew up in a military camp, I said, nodding my chin toward the paper cuts on the window. I never would have guessed she had such a talent for this kind of craft. Oh, those are just little trinkets that Miss Elan cut for fun, Yuying replied with an apologetic smile. But the Crown Princess treasures them like precious jewels, so she pasted them all up. When the Crown Princess first returned to the capital, Miss Elan was the only one who treated her with genuine kindness. That's why the Crown Princess has always been so good to her. When the Xue family was exiled from the capital, the Crown Princess sent them a steady stream of money and fine silks. But what happened today was entirely Miss Elan's doing. She acted on her own accord. Please don't hold it against the Crown Princess. Yuying had always been a straightforward woman, but there was a hesitancy in her voice now, a reluctance to speak plainly. The orchids, the paper cuts, the friendship between the two women, the Yi family's request for the imperial marriage all those years ago. Yi Qingxuang's apparent indifference toward Qi Ku, a wild, unthinkable suspicion began to take shape in my mind. Could it be Yi Qingxuang, Yi Qingxuang? Little do you know that the person you willingly tied your fate to has been plotting with your husband to devour you whole. A cool, calm voice sounded behind me. Yueying, what is the meaning of this? Qi Ku and Yi Qingxuang had returned to the palace early, but Shuerilan showed not the slightest hint of panic. Instead, she had leisurely changed into a pale blue silk dress, which fluttered gently in the early spring breeze, making her look delicate and charming beyond words. When Qi Ku saw me standing disheveled in the courtyard, being punished for learning my place, his face immediately darkened with anger, but the moment his eyes fell on Shuerilan, half of his rage melted away. Even the bewildered Yi Qingxuang felt her cheeks growing hot, a faint blush spreading across her ears. I watched them coldly from the corner of my eye, my suspicion confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt. Romantic feelings between women were considered a filthy, unspeakable scandal among the noble families of the capital, but in the brothels of the red light district, such things were far from uncommon. The courtesan who had taught me everything I knew had once served the young daughter of a wealthy merchant. I steadied my breathing, my mind racing as a bold plan began to form. Please don't blame Sister Yi, Your Highness, Shuerilan declared righteously. Stepping forward to shield Yi Qingxuang behind her, a concubine who shows disrespect to her mistress deserves to be punished. Shouldn't the affairs of the inner courtyard be handled by the crown princess? Brazen, she was making a play for Yi Qingxuang's authority to manage the household. Qi Ku caught on immediately, his expression turning stern as he turned to Yi Qingxuang. Qingxuang, it was I who excused Ziyun from the duty of paying her respects. Are you punishing her out of resentment toward me? I thought you were truly a woman of great generosity and tolerance, but it seems you are nothing more than a hypocrite, putting on a show for the world to see. Your petty, vindictive nature makes you unfit to manage the household of the Eastern Palace. Ziyun. At that precise moment, I rolled my eyes and collapsed weakly to the ground at Yi Qingxuang's feet. Crown Princess, I whispered, my voice thin and breathless. As my hands scrabbled up her skirt, clinging tightly to her thighs, I must have somehow offended Miss Shui. She said that while Your Highness and the Crown Princess were away at the palace, she would teach me a lesson in proper conduct. I am but a lowly woman, a little physical suffering means nothing to me, please. Your Highness, Crown Princess, do not quarrel with our guest over my sake. I knew exactly how I looked in that moment, the picture of a helpless, wronged woman from the brothels. Yi Qingxuang jumped in surprise, the faint blush on her ears spreading to her entire face. She hurried to help me to my feet, brushing the dust off my clothes, before shooting Shuerilan a reproachful glance. But in the end, she said nothing to defend herself, nothing to confirm my story. TSK. Yi Qingxuang truly believed that Shuerilan had been acting on her behalf. She was afraid that Shuerilan would be blamed by Qi Ku, so she planned to take the fall herself. But I couldn't let that happen. I gave Yueying a discreet kick under the table, winking at her. Yueying dropped to her knees with a loud thud, her voice trembling as she spoke. As soon as Your Highness and the Crown Princess left the palace, Miss Elan ordered us to fetch Miss Ziyun, she said. She said that a singing girl from a brothel was unfit to raise the Crown Prince's eldest son. She also said that everyone in the eastern courtyard was nothing but cowards. She insisted that Miss Ziyun stand here for 3 hours as an example to all of us. Yueying had a talent for getting straight to the point, one that rivaled even Shuerilan's. The servants and guards standing around the courtyard listened in growing outrage. A guest in the palace had dared to meddle in the affairs of the Eastern Palace, even going so far as to usurp the Crown Princess's authority. Even Qi Ku's face was flushed with embarrassment. Yi Qingxuang's eyes widened in shock. As if she couldn't believe those words had come out of Shuerilan's mouth. No, I didn't say that. You lying servant girl, how dare you slander me? Shuerilan panicked, darting back and forth between Yi Qingxuang and Qi Ku, trying to grab hold of either of them, under the watchful eyes of everyone present. Qi Ku's frown deepened with every passing second. That's enough, Miss Shui. You ought to spend more time accompanying your father and less time meddling in the affairs of the inner courtyard. As for you, Crown Princess, your failure to discipline your household is unacceptable. You will confine yourself to your quarters for 2 months to reflect on your mistakes. Yueying, your salary will be docked for a full year. Before his words had even faded, he grabbed Shui Ilan by the wrist and stormed off, his sleeves flaring angrily behind him. As Yueying poured me a cup of tea, she was still seething with anger. It was clearly all Miss Ilan's fault. What mistake did the Crown Princess make that she needs to reflect on? Yi Qingshuang shot her a sharp glance, silencing her complaints with a single look. I'm sorry, she said, her voice sincere as she raised her teacup to me in a gesture of apology. Ilan has always been a little spoiled and willful. I apologize for the way you were treated. I traced the rim of my teacup with my finger, my voice soft as I spoke. I'm afraid the person who owes us both an apology is someone else entirely. I told her the entire story then, recounting the passionate vows of love and eternal devotion that I had overheard between the Crown Prince and Shui Ilan, painting a vivid picture of their secret affair. Yi Qingshuang's hand tightened around her teacup so hard that her knuckles turned white. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "That's impossible. Ilan would never say such things to me. You can't wake a person who is pretending to be asleep, but if I wanted to survive, I had no choice but to jolt her awake." I pulled the poetry collection out of my sleeve, spreading it open before her eyes. The paper-cut portrait tucked inside this book of poems. It looks as if it was cut by the same hand as the ones on your windows, when your husband's position as Crown Prince was hanging by a thread. When no one else dared to risk angering the emperor by standing by his side, only the Yi family stepped forward to offer their support, to be a friend in need. I can only guess, your father may have done it for the stability of the nation. But you did it for Shui Ilan, didn't you? Yi Qingshuang stared at the paper-cut portrait, her eyes empty, as if her soul had been sucked right out of her body. Only if Qi Ku ascends the throne can he clear your father-in-law's name of false charges. And if you become the empress, you will be able to help him even more. After your marriage, his deliberate favoritism toward me was actually beneficial to you, wasn't it? Because, after all, the person you love is not him. I paused for dramatic effect. Yi Qingshuang's face drained of all color, turning as white as a sheet of paper. I had guessed correctly. Glancing up at the sky, I changed the subject abruptly, my voice sharp and cutting. But the person you love is currently lying beneath your husband. Yi Qingshuang clapped her hands over her ears, screaming, "Stop it, I don't believe you." She realized her slip of the tongue immediately, her face flushing with panic as she tried to backtrack. "No, I mean, I don't understand what you're talking about." I wiped the smile off my face. Rising to my feet to take my leave, "Go to the side door of the Qingjing Pavilion, send Yueying there a few times, then you'll understand." But days turned into weeks. And the eastern courtyard remained eerily quiet, as if I had never been there at all. Had Yueying failed me? Had she gone there only to find nothing? "Why haven't I seen Yueying around these past few days?" I asked Baoyang. She was holding Yuana in her arms, standing in the corridor teasing a parrot. "Oh, her. She's been going over to the eastern courtyard every day, begging Miss Shui to come chat with the Crown Princess. But the son and daughter-in-law of the Shui family left last month. Miss Shui always says she's too busy taking care of her father's illness to come." Sigh. Yi Qingshuang was still clinging to the hope of getting a straight answer from Shui Ilan. She truly was a woman who wouldn't give up until she'd hit rock bottom. "Oh," I said, feigning nonchalance, "where is His Highness?" Baoyan's expression flickered for a moment, her answer vague and evasive. He's busy with important matters, I suppose. I'm sure he'll come to see you as soon as he's free." She pulled her sleeve down self-consciously, trying to hide a jade bracelet on her wrist, a bracelet that hadn't been there yesterday. Baoyang had been sold into the Eastern Palace by her older brother to pay off the family's debts. Her family was so poor they could barely afford to put food on the table. Her brothers relied entirely on her monthly wages to survive. When Qi Ku had first brought me back to the capital, I had been afraid of gossip and rumors. As a lowly concubine with no family background to speak of, I had dismissed all the other servants, keeping only Baoyang because she had always been the most eager to help, the most loyal to me. When I had given birth to Yuana, she had been even more overjoyed than I was. If only you could climb a little higher in His Highness's favor, she had gushed, hugging Yuana tightly to her chest. One day, he might even become the crown prince of this dynasty. I had been so shocked that I had torn my postnatal stitches trying to clamp a hand over her mouth. In the imperial family, the legitimate son of the empress came first. Only in the absence of a legitimate heir would the eldest son inherit the throne. If her words had gotten out, people would have either laughed at me, a former singing girl, for daring to dream of becoming an empress, or accused me of cursing Yi Qingxuang for failing to give birth to a son. I didn't mind that Baoyang was loyal to me only because I was favored by the crown prince, but if she was now having second thoughts, if she was planning to abandon me for someone more powerful, then I would have to keep a close eye on her. Your Highness, I thought you said you were going to the study to sober up first. What are you doing here? Baoyang exclaimed in surprise, jumping to her feet as she looked toward the courtyard gate. She quickly set Yuana down, flustered. Chiku stumbled into the hall, reeking of alcohol. We hadn't seen him in days. He threw his arms around me, nearly knocking me over. Baoyang and I struggled together to drag him over to the bed and lay him down. My mentor, he finally managed to talk some sense into those old stubborn fools in the Imperial Guard. He mumbled, his lips twisting into a drunken grin. The Imperial Guard, go brew a strong pot of hangover soup, I ordered Baoyang. Dismissing her, Chiku rambled on. His words slurred and incoherent. When it's all over, when we succeed, the glory of being my right-hand man will be yours. I'll make you my noble consort, then my empress. No one will dare to say a single word against it. His bleary eyes stared up at me, as he reached out to stroke my face, handling me as if I were a fragile, precious treasure. A heavy stone settled in my chest, pressing down on me so hard I could barely breathe. The you he was talking about, of course, was Shuilan, not me. By then, I would already be a cold, dead corpse. What about the crown princess? I asked, taking a deep breath, unable to stop myself from pressing for answers. And what about your concubine and your son? Chiku waved a hand dismissively, his tone filled with disdain. The military power of the Yi family will be mine sooner or later. She entered this marriage to secure her family's future. She deserves whatever consequences come her way. As for Ziyun, his eyes flickered, as if he were weighing his words carefully. Baoyang, her maid in the west courtyard, will slip her a bowl of tea laced with a fertility-destroying poison on the night of the coup. Will claim that Lady Yi switched the calming tea with poison. It will be the perfect excuse to charge the Yi family with treason. She is the mother of my eldest son, after all, and she's so naive and ignorant. I'll let her and the child live in the palace, confined to a small courtyard. There's no need for you to be jealous of her. Earlier that day, I had laughed at Yi Qingxuang for being unable to let go of her feelings for Shuilan, but here I was, asking these pointless questions, proving that I was just as foolish as she was, clinging to a glimmer of hope that didn't exist. He took my hand, pressing a soft, fleeting kiss to my knuckles, but I flinched as if his lips were on fire. Yanking my hand away from his grasp, Chiku blinked in confusion, shaking his head hard, as if trying to clear the fog from his mind to see the face of the woman in front of him clearly. A commotion erupted in the courtyard outside. His Highness clearly said he was going to the study to sober up first. What is he doing here? You must have used some underhanded tricks to lure him here. Shuilan's maid shouted, her voice shrill and accusatory. Afraid of disturbing Chiku, Baoyang replied in a hushed whisper, how dare you spout such nonsense? You're just a guest here, you have no right to dictate where His Highness goes. Shuilan's maid let out a sneering laugh. Our master, young lady, and several of their old friends are waiting in the front hall for His Highness to discuss important matters. Of course I have the right to look for him. It wasn't until I opened the door that she reluctantly fell silent. I took the bowl of soup from Baoyan's hands and said to the maid, go back and report. His Highness is resting here. Any matters can wait until tomorrow. The maid bit her lip, but didn't dare to argue with me after all. She gave a huffy curtsy and left. Baoyang spat in the direction of her retreating back, muttering under her breath, just you wait. I'll make you pay for this when we're under the same roof. I pretended not to hear. Turning around, I instructed her, by the way, The jade orchids in the crown princess's garden will bloom soon. Keep a close eye on Yuana and make sure he doesn't go near them. Baoyang nodded, her eyes flickering almost imperceptibly. Unrequited love that fades away without a trace is always the hardest to let go of. But time waits for no one. I had to give Yi Qingxuang a little push, however. Qi Ku had originally planned to give me a bowl of tea that would make me infertile for the rest of my life. Had he changed his mind later, or was there someone else who wanted me dead? I stared at the hangover soup in my hand, deep in thought. When I woke up the next morning, Qi Ku was nowhere to be seen, and Baoyang was gone too. My mind raced. I quickly picked up Yuana and rushed to the eastern courtyard. Knocking frantically on the door, Yi Qingxuang didn't turn me away, but she avoided mentioning Shui Yilan at all costs. Instead, she suggested we play a game of chess to pass the time. Making small talk as we moved the pieces, she was an excellent chess player, but my own skills were nothing more than a few tricks I had learned to amuse my patrons in the brothel. I lost every single game, my pieces annihilated completely. Don't be discouraged, let's play again, she said with a faint smile, the first time I had seen her look truly alive, like a woman her age should. Our young lady's chess skills are unrivaled even among the military commanders, Yu Ying boasted proudly. Chess is closely related to the art of war. Even the Duke himself has said it's a pity that the young lady wasn't born a man. If she had been, she would surely have achieved great military exploits and gone down in history. Yi Qingxuang's eyes dimmed, and she fell silent, rearranging the chess pieces on the board. Yuana, who had been clinging to the edge of the couch, suddenly piped up in a clear, childish voice. Then you should keep being the empress. And let my mother be the noble consort. Yuana will help you achieve great things. Oh, my little ancestor. I quickly stuffed a pastry into his mouth to silence him. Yi Qingxuang stared at him, stunned. What did you say? He's just a 2-year-old child, talking nonsense. I laughed it off, trying to downplay the comment. Yi Qingxuang was about to ask more questions when the courtyard gate was suddenly slammed open, echoing loudly. A young servant stood outside with a grim expression. Rushing to report, Your Highness, something terrible has happened to your jade orchids. His Highness has ordered you to come see for yourself immediately. Yi Qingxuang and I hurried to the garden one after the other. Inside, Shui Yilan was whispering intimately to Qi Ku. When Qi Ku saw us approaching, he coughed lightly and took a step back, putting some distance between himself and Shui Yilan. Yi Qingxuang ignored them completely, striding quickly over to the flower bed. The buds that had been about to bloom just yesterday had all been pulled out by their roots, lying wilted and lifeless on the ground. Shui Yilan scurried over to her side, her voice filled with fake concern. I wanted to check on the jade orchids you were going to give me as a gift. Imagine my horror when I found them trampled like this. I immediately sent for His Highness and you, sister. Yi Qingxuang paid her no attention, bending down to pick up the uprooted orchids one by one. Examining them closely, with each orchid she set down, her face grew darker and darker, more and more dejected. It was him, the maid who had quarreled with Baoyang a few days earlier suddenly shouted, pointing a finger at Yuana. He destroyed the jade orchids before and was caught red-handed. He must have done this out of revenge. Several of Shui Yilan's personal servants nodded their heads in agreement, insisting that Yuana was the one who had destroyed the flower bed. Qi Ku's gaze swept over me, finally settling on Baoyang. You're from the west courtyard. What do you have to say about this? Baoyang twisted the hem of her dress nervously, her words vague and evasive. I haven't seen either of my mistresses all day. I have no idea where they went or what they were doing. Shui Yilan's maid nodded firmly, adding fuel to the fire. That proves it. I saw this mother and son sneaking around the garden at noon today. Yi Qingxuang's eyes sharpened. Cutting through the air like a blade, at noon, the maid flinched under her intense stare, shrinking back. Ah, or maybe it was in the afternoon. Either way, I definitely saw them. Shui Yilan stepped over the tangled mess of flower stems, grabbing Yi Qingxuang's arm and pulling her to her feet. I understand you don't want to quarrel with a concubine, sister, but today, she has not only humiliated me, she has humiliated you as well. You cannot let her get away with this unpunished. I glanced at Baoyang, standing behind Shui Yilan. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and the moment our eyes met, she quickly looked away, avoiding my gaze. Even if I could find 10 or 8 servants to testify on behalf of Yuana and me, their words would never carry as much weight as Baoyan's, a maid who had served me closely for years. And besides, the person administering justice here today had never intended to seek justice for me in the first place. If Yuana and I hadn't spent the entire day playing chess with Yi Qingxuang, we would never have been able to clear our names. No matter how hard we tried to defend ourselves, Yi Qingxuang stared at Shuerilan, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and betrayal, as if something inside her was crumbling to pieces. Yu Ying stepped forward, wanting to defend me, but before she could speak, Qi Ke's cold, indifferent voice cut through the air. Does it matter? His gaze rested on me. But there was no warmth in it, no more emotion than if he had been looking at Baoyang, at Yu Ying, or at a flower, a tree, a stone. You and Yuana have everything you have today because of my extraordinary kindness and generosity. You should know your place. There are some grievances in this world that you simply have to endure. After years of being together, I had finally heard the truth from his own lips. After all, in his eyes, I was nothing more than a stray cat or dog he had taken in off the street. But what His Highness, the noble Crown Prince, didn't realize was that stray cats and dogs who had endured too much cold and hunger, who had struggled to survive on the streets, would do absolutely anything to ensure they never went hungry or cold again. I gave a bitter, self-deprecating laugh, closing the door that Qi Ke had left wide open when he had stormed off. I had just copied 2 pages of a Buddhist scripture when a gust of wind howled through the window, scattering the paper across the floor. Yu Ying slipped into the room quietly, looking around furtively as she pushed the door open. She set a table full of pastries and warm porridge before me, sighing heavily. The Crown Princess set the entire garden on fire. She also tore all the paper cuts off the windows, shredding them to pieces. I rubbed my aching wrists, a small smile playing on my lips. My plan to trick Shuerilan into falsely accusing me of a crime had worked perfectly. Shuerilan had always resented me, and a few days earlier, when Qi Ke had slipped away from under her nose to spend the night in the west courtyard, she must have been filled with shock and rage. Qi Ke was her only hope of returning to the capital, of reclaiming her life of luxury and privilege, and of one day sitting on the Empress's throne. To achieve this goal, she had not hesitated to take advantage of Yi Qingxuang's forbidden love for her, using it to hand the entire Yi family over to Qi Ke on a silver platter. Ever since Shuerilan had moved into the Eastern Palace, she had kept Qi Ke by her side day and night, monopolizing his attention completely. The only thing that made her uneasy was probably me, a former singing girl who had taken advantage of her absence to win Qi Ke's favor when they had been separated by thousands of miles. Now that Baoyang had become Qi Ke's inside man, she knew that I was going to be reduced to a barren, discarded concubine with no hope of ever regaining the Crown Prince's favor, so she had rushed to curry favor with Shuerilan. Seizing the opportunity to suggest destroying the jade orchids to provoke a conflict between Yi Qingxuang and me, Shuerilan knew better than anyone else just how much Yi Qingxuang cared for her and how much she cherished those jade orchids. She had jumped at the chance to carry out the plan, and Qi Ke had chosen to turn a blind eye to it all. She and Qi Ke had been putting on a show, but Yi Qingxuang and I had been putting on a show of our own. The only difference was that my goal had been to make Yi Qingxuang witness firsthand how her pure, sincere love had been trampled into the mud by the person she adored. I still hadn't told her about the other big secret, the most important one. We were now 2 grasshoppers tied to the same rope. We had to work together if we wanted to survive. The coast is clear, miss, Yu Ying whispered. Please come with me to the eastern courtyard to talk to the Crown Princess. I nodded at the stack of rice paper in front of me, making an excuse to delay. We have to see this charade through to the end. Let's wait a few more days. I felt a twinge of guilt toward Yi Qingxuang in my heart. She had tended to that garden of jade orchids diligently every day, through wind and rain, from autumn to spring, for over half a year, and she was an intelligent woman. I suspected she had already begun to piece together the truth. Yu Ying came to invite me again and again, patiently waiting for me to finish copying an entire stack of Buddhist scriptures. His Highness and Miss Shui don't even bother to hide their relationship anymore. Several servants have already caught them together. TSK, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. I calculated the days in my mind. In the previous life that Yuana had described, this was probably the point where Yi Qingxuang had finally woken up to Shui Yilan's hypocrisy and lies. But perhaps Shui Yilan had managed to smooth things over with sweet words and empty promises, or perhaps Yi Qingxuang had chosen to avoid the truth, refusing to see it. By the time she had finally realized she had been played for a fool, it had been too late for her to do anything about it. But this time, things would be different. The candle flame in the Buddhist hall flickered, growing dimmer and dimmer. I reached out to trim the wick, which had become tangled, looking out the window at the pale, early morning sky. I felt an unexpected surge of anticipation, looking forward to the night when I would die with blood pouring out of my 7 orifices. Treason, Yi Qingxuang repeated the word numbly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. I didn't mention Yuana's claim of being reborn. Instead, I told her everything, the nonsensical ramblings of a child in his sleep, the conversations I had overheard between Qi Ku and Han Li, and the passionate confessions I had heard between him and Shui Yilan. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Yi Qingxuang asked, her voice filled with doubt and uncertainty. I answered her honestly. How was I supposed to know whose side you were on? What if you had obeyed Shui Yilan without question? I would have been walking straight into a lion's den. Her cheeks turned bright red with embarrassment. She coughed awkwardly, changing the subject. This is a matter of the utmost importance. I must inform my father immediately. Yi Qingxuang quickly wrote a coded message that no one else would be able to understand, but she hesitated for a long time, unable to bring herself to sign her name at the end. The emperor and his son are at odds with each other. I'm putting my father in an impossible position, she said, massaging her temples with a troubled expression. The emperor has long been wary of my family's military achievements and prestige, but with unrest on the borderlands, he has had no choice but to send my father to lead the army and conquer the Western territories. Furthermore, the emperor has been seriously ill for a long time. If my family interferes in this matter, we will end up offending everyone, no matter which side we choose to support. I knew nothing about these court intrigues, growing anxious by the second. So you're willing to become a deposed empress the moment you step into the palace, watching your family fall into ruin for the rest of your life? Or, does your father have any intention of seizing the throne himself? Yi Qingxuang's eyes shot open wide, horrified. Don't speak such treasonous nonsense. The Yi family has been loyal to the throne for 3 generations. There has never been a single traitor among us. Besides, the 4 foreign tribes are already eyeing our borders like hungry tigers. Civil unrest in the court will surely lead to a catastrophic disaster. I paced back and forth in the room like an ant on a hot pan. Are we just supposed to wait for death, then watch the Shui family reap all the benefits while we destroy each other? When snipe and clam fight, it is the fisherman who profits. I came to a sudden halt, my eyes lighting up with a new idea. What if your family became the fisherman? She paused for a moment, then her eyes widened as she finally understood what I was suggesting. On the night of the coup, we would secretly send a small detachment of the Western Expeditionary Army to surround the capital city. By dawn, the ailing old emperor would abdicate the throne, the crown prince would ascend to power amid tears, and the morning sun would rise as usual. As for why the Western Expeditionary Army had come to the capital, naturally, they had been ordered by the new emperor to eliminate the traitors. The countless dead soldiers lying in pools of blood on the outskirts of the city would serve as irrefutable evidence of their treachery. The Shui family, I said, placing a black chess piece firmly in the center of the board, will be the traitors. Yi Qingxuang stared at that single black piece, her eyelashes fluttering slightly. When old Master Shui first requested to return to the capital for medical treatment, the emperor only permitted him to come alone, she said suddenly, her voice quiet and distant. But Yilan wrote to me, saying she was worried about my old wound. Yi Qingxuang gave a bitter laugh, pulling down the collar of her robe to reveal a terrible, jagged scar. It snaked its way from her jawline down to her chest, carefully concealed by layers of white powder, almost invisible unless you looked closely. My mother died when I was very young. My father raised me by his side in the military camp," she murmured, her fingers tracing the edge of the scar gently. "Life in the army was harsh and unforgiving. I got this wound during a training exercise. Later, when my father discovered that I had no interest in men, that my heart belonged to women instead, he flew into a rage. He sent me back to the capital immediately, ordering me to abandon my unnatural desires and learn to be a proper wife and mother. The noble ladies of the capital laughed at me for being rough and uncultured. They sneered at my ugly scar. Only Elan treated me with kindness and understanding. She even said that she was just like me. But she has been here for 63 days. Not once has she mentioned my old wound." Her voice faded to a whisper, her fingers still lingering on the black chess pieces on the board, as if seeking some kind of comfort in their touch. My eyelids twitched nervously. Yi Qingxuang was naive and inexperienced when it came to love. She had probably thought of herself as some kind of unspeakable monster, a freak of nature, until Shui Ilan had appeared, offering her the first taste of warmth and acceptance she had ever known. But I didn't have time to wait for her to heal her broken heart. Less than 20 days remained until the coup. If she didn't send that letter tonight, the Western Expeditionary Army would never arrive in time to save us. The courtyard outside was eerily quiet. Yu Ying, who was standing guard at the door, must have nodded off. I bit my lip, making up my mind. I had seen countless women in the brothel who had been driven to the brink of madness by unrequited love, willing to die for the men who had broken their hearts. We courtesans might not have been good for much, but we knew 1,001 ways to help people forget their sorrows. I reached out and snuffed out the candle flame with my fingers. Then, I slid one arm around the back of Yi Qingxuang's neck, pulling her closer to me. The chessboard was knocked sideways, the black pieces clattering to the floor and disappearing into the shadows. My lips left hers, trailing soft, delicate kisses along the familiar path of her scar, following its every curve and twist. My other hand followed the gentle rise and fall of her waist, and the slender body in my arms gradually stopped trembling, melting into my touch. The faint sound of dripping water echoed under the eaves, the last of the winter snow melting away, trickling down to form streams of spring water. "Why did the lights go out? I'll go get a new candle," Yu Ying said, pushing the door open with a creak. Yi Qingxuang froze, holding her breath. I straightened up slowly, feigning nonchalance. The old wick turned black. It was time for a new one. "Wait," Yi Qingxuang called out to me in a soft voice, stopping me in my tracks. "It won't be difficult for the Yi family to take control of the capital and eliminate the Shui family. But if Qi Ku swallows his pride for the time being, he will surely ally himself with others and stage a counterattack in the future. We need a long-term plan." I reached up to straighten the golden hairpin in her hair, leaning in close to whisper in her ear. "He won't have a future. His Highness, the noble Crown Prince, had thought it an act of extraordinary mercy to give me a bowl of tea that would make me infertile. Little did he know that his cruelty would force me to come up with a clever plan of my own, teas to prevent pregnancy, teas to induce abortion, teas to render a person permanently infertile." These potions had filled the air of the red light district with their bitter, acrid scent for as long as I could remember. Every brothel kept a few of these recipes hidden away. It was common for the new girls to spend their days squatting in the kitchen, learning how to brew these dangerous concoctions. The most toxic of them all was the tea that caused permanent infertility, though it was called a sterility tea. Its true effect was to damage the internal organs severely, causing both men and women to waste away and grow weak rapidly, rendering them unable to have children as a side effect. Some people with weak constitutions would die within a year or two of drinking just one bowl. It was mostly used by the cheapest brothels, who valued convenience over the lives of their girls. That night, when I had poured away the hangover soup that Baoyang had brought me and replaced it with a bowl of the deadly sterility tea, feeding it spoonful by spoonful to the drunken Qi Ku, a sudden memory had flashed through my mind of the first time we had met, when he had fed me medicine just like this. What if you had failed to keep your position as crown prince? What if you had stayed in Xuanyang and become an idle prince instead? I had asked, wiping the dribble of medicine from the corner of his mouth. But there were no what ifs in life. Han Li began to visit the Eastern Palace more and more frequently. Chiku spent longer and longer periods of time away from the palace. Yi Qingshuang remained confined to her quarters, supposedly reflecting on her mistakes. Yuana stayed safely in the Eastern courtyard. I had forgiven Baoyang for her betrayal. And the two of us continued to live together in the West courtyard, each harboring our own secrets and agendas, pretending that nothing had changed. The days passed in an eerie calm. By the time I realized that several unfamiliar faces had appeared among the servants of the inner courtyard, the night we had all been waiting for had arrived quietly. The drums struck 3 times, the moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale, silvery glow over the palace. The night was unnaturally quiet, making the sound of footsteps in the courtyard outside stand out sharply. The door slid open silently, and a pair of pale green embroidered shoes stepped into the room first. I lifted my eyes slowly, locking gazes with the person who had entered. Shui Yilan stood in the middle of the hall, a triumphant smile playing on her lips, looking as beautiful and delicate as ever. Beside her stood Baoyang, holding a wooden tray tremblingly. 2 burly old women followed closely behind them. Miss Ziyun, Baoyang said, her voice shaking as she held out the tray toward me. You already have a son to secure your future. Drinking this bowl of sterility tea won't be much of a loss for you. Miss Shui and His Highness are deeply in love. We will all have to serve her in the future. I lowered my head, sniffing the contents of the bowl. Then I looked up at Shui Yilan, a cold smile on my lips. This isn't a tea to prevent pregnancy, is it? The smile froze on Shui Yilan's face, her expression darkened. And she snapped, "Stop talking nonsense and drink it." I sighed, shaking my head. You secretly replaced the sterility tea that His Highness ordered with a poison that will slit my throat. When he asks about it later, do you plan to pin the blame on Baoyang? Baoyang's eyes widened in horror, her legs gave way beneath her, and she fell to the floor, the bowl clattering to the ground and shattering into pieces. You fool, Shui Yilan screamed, her almond-shaped eyes blazing with anger. She began kicking Baoyang mercilessly with her embroidered shoes. Hurry up and go get another bowl. Baoyang cowered on the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. I don't dare, I don't dare. I thought it was just sterility tea. Shui Yilan let out a cold, mocking laugh. What does it matter if I kill you? Did you really think you meant anything to him? In a few hours, His Highness will be the emperor. I will be his childhood sweetheart, who suffered so much for him. My father will be the hero who helped him seize the throne. What are you? A lowly singing girl who sold her body for a living, nothing but a stain on his bed, a disgrace to the imperial harem. Your son will have to give up his position as well. My children will be the legitimate heirs to the throne, born of the empress. One of the old women panted heavily as she entered the room, carrying another bowl of dark, steaming liquid. Pinch her mouth open and pour it down her throat, Shui Yilan ordered lazily. What about me? A soft, cold voice asked. Cutting through the tension in the room, a slender figure stepped out from behind the folding screen. Shui Yilan gasped, staring at her as if she had seen a ghost. Sister Yi, she stammered, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. What are you doing in this lowly servant's room? You told me that once I became empress, and after the emperor cleared the Shui family's name, you would enter the palace to become a female official. Yi Qingshuang said, her voice calm and steady, yet filled with unspeakable sorrow. You said you would never marry, choosing instead to stay by my side for the rest of your life. So why are you now talking about your children becoming the legitimate heirs to the throne? Shui Yilan's face turned a dozen different shades of red and white. Finally, she let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Chiku and I have been in love since we were children. My family suffered so much because of him. If it weren't for all these unfortunate events, the position of crown princess and the future position of empress would have always been mine. I lied to you, yes, but I only did it to increase Chiku's chances of ascending the throne. As for his desire to seize the military power of the Yi family, that is not my fault, sister, Shui Yilan said, softening her tone, trying to coax her. We are women, after all. Our proper place is to be virtuous wives and mothers, supporting our husbands and raising our children. Go back to your quarters quietly. I will make sure Chiku spares your life and the lives of the Yi family. Yi Qingxuang's eyes were as dark as ink, her expression unreadable. She didn't move a muscle. "Are you really going to defend this lowly servant girl?" Shuilan shrieked, her patience finally snapping. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from outside the courtyard, growing closer and closer. Before Shuilan could react, a squad of tall, imposing soldiers dressed in full armor burst into the room. Surrounding them, Shuilan stared at them dumbfounded, their uniforms vastly different from those of the Eastern Palace Guards or the Imperial Army. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "Captain Yi has surrounded the Imperial Palace," the lead soldier announced. Bowing respectfully to Yi Qingxuang, "All the rebel soldiers stationed on the outskirts of the capital have been eliminated." Captain Yi, he must be Yi Qingxuang's cousin. She had told me earlier that her father, Duke Su, had replied to her letter, saying that it would be inappropriate for a high-ranking military commander to return to the capital without permission. Instead, he had sent her cousin with a small detachment of elite troops to help us. "Good," Yi Qingxuang said, her voice firm and decisive. "Leave half the men here to guard this place. The rest of you, come with me to the palace." She glanced past Shuilan, who was now staring at her like a fish out of water, gasping for air. Then she pulled a token from her sleeve and pressed it into my hand. "Take this, all the soldiers will obey your orders." I can't, I'm not capable of this," I stammered, trying to push the token back into her hand. "All my life, I had been nothing more than a plaything, a source of amusement for men. I had never commanded anyone in my life." She smiled, the same confident, brilliant smile she had worn when she had beaten me soundly at chess 100 times over. "If you are capable of this, Yuana will be able to grow up healthy and strong, achieving great things in the future. He will go down in history as the wise emperor who was raised and supported by two empress dowagers working together in harmony." I clenched the token tightly in my hand, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. I sat down in the courtyard, ignoring the shouts, curses, and desperate pleas of the people locked inside the room behind me. Beyond the walls of the inner courtyard, the capital city was still wrapped in the quiet of the night, seemingly no different from any other night, until the first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. A loud knocking echoed at the gate of the Eastern Palace. It was a dozen soldiers, dressed in the same armor as the ones Yi Qingxuang had left with me. The moment they saw the token in my hand, they dropped to one knee, bowing deeply. "The matter has been resolved successfully, Miss. The Crown Princess requests that you and the young prince come to the palace at once." Yuying rushed over, carrying Yuana in her arms. I held him tightly as the soldiers helped me mount a horse, surrounding us as we rode through the unfamiliar streets and alleys of the capital. Some of the shopkeepers, who had woken up early and were yawning as they opened their shop doors, peeked out curiously at the woman and child being escorted by so many soldiers, only to shrink back in fear when one of the soldiers shouted a warning at them. The towering imperial city walls appeared in the distance, their eaves curving upward like the wings of a phoenix, as magnificent and imposing as a palace in the heavens. Gate after gate swung open slowly before us. At each gate stood rows of soldiers in gleaming armor, who all bowed their heads respectfully at the sight of the token in my hand. "Such a small token," I muttered to myself in amazement, staring down at it, "yet it holds so much power." The military officer riding beside me smiled faintly. "Military orders are like mountains, absolute and unyielding. Even the lives of the 3,000 rebel soldiers who now lie dead in a pool of blood on the outskirts of the capital were ended by just one small token like this." The black token in my palm suddenly felt like a piece of hot iron, burning my skin. I almost dropped it in shock. Yi Qingxuang, that crazy woman, how dare she entrust something so important to me? Sweat beaded on my palms, soaking the surface of the token. A strange, tingling sensation spread from my hand up my arms, coursing through my veins and filling every part of my body. So this was what the men we had fought over in the brothel were really after. Even the crown prince, who had looked like a celestial being, the power to make words carry the weight of 9 tripods, to decide life and death with a single thought, the boundless authority that could make fame and fortune bow at its feet. I ran my fingertips over the token, feeling the cold, hard touch of metal against my skin. Yet it was more precious to me than all the finest pearls, jade, gold, and silver I had ever touched. I lost count of how many steps I climbed before I finally stumbled into the opulent hall of supreme harmony, gasping for breath. The imperial guards had all been subdued by the Western Expeditionary Army. Old Master Xue knelt trembling like a leaf in the wind among the sword-wielding soldiers, a blooded head that looked eerily like Han Li's lying beside his knees. Qi Ku and Yi Qingxuang stood on opposite sides of the empty imperial throne. I couldn't remember the last time I had seen Qi Ku, but he looked drastically haggard, with several strands of white hair visible at his temples. I had been thorough when I had slipped him the sterility potion. I had used a slightly stronger dose than necessary. Order the Western Expeditionary Army to retreat at once, Qi Ku said through gritted teeth, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. I promise you the position of Empress. I will never break my word. Yi Qingxuang's tone was respectful and deferential. The Western Expeditionary Army will naturally obey the imperial edict and retreat. But what your concubine was discussing with your majesty just now was how to deal with the traitorous Xue clan, not the position of Empress. Qi Ku's eyes bulged with rage, and he lowered his voice to a dangerous whisper. Were you not once the closest of friends with Elan? Must you really exterminate her entire family? You can be the Empress, and she can be a concubine, no, a Jiyu, a Jowie, or even a Baolin. Would that not be enough? Yi Qingxuang lifted her head, her voice ringing out clearly through the hall. What are you saying, Your Majesty? A military campaign must always have a just cause. The Western Expeditionary Army marched on the capital to eliminate traitors. How did this become a personal vendetta against the Xue clan? If the Xue clan is not the traitor, then who is? Old Master Xue, driven to the brink of madness by fear, suddenly let out a shrill cry. Your Highness, I did everything for you. The dead soldiers on the outskirts of the capital have nothing to do with me. Captain Yi acted swiftly, knocking him unconscious with the hilt of his sword. That's right, if he didn't take the blame for the coup, would Qi Ku be foolish enough to admit that he had planned to stage a rebellion himself? Qi Ku's gaze darkened. After a long, tense silence, he spoke. Very well. The Xue clan committed high treason and deserves death. But Elan was not involved in their plot. You must spare her life. Yi Qingxuang looked hesitant, her eyes turning to me for guidance. Noble ladies from prominent families would never understand. Sometimes death is a mercy. I gave her a subtle nod of approval. Yi Qingxuang nodded in return. Qi Ku collapsed to the ground as if all his strength had been drained from his body. The eunuchs and palace maids surrounding him rushed forward in a flurry to help him into the inner hall. A nation cannot be without a ruler for a single day. The coronation ceremony was held immediately after the entire traitorous clan was executed. The Empress's coronation ceremony took place on the same day, along with the enfeoffment of the imperial concubines. Naturally, Yi Qingxuang was named the Empress, the mistress of the inner palace. I was conferred the title of noble consort Shu, and a dazed-looking woman named Jiang Lena was granted the title of consort Zhao. But Qi Ku's health deteriorated rapidly after his coronation. He suffered from constant dizziness and excruciating bone pain, often unable to attend court sessions. The imperial physicians always shook their heads in vague, evasive tones, unable to diagnose or treat his mysterious illness. With no other choice, the court officials had to assist the Empress in temporarily handling state affairs. Yuana was sent to the Imperial Academy, only coming to spend time with me during his leisure hours, on a bright, sunny afternoon. Yi Qingxuang was so exhausted that she fell asleep lying on her desk, which was piled high with official documents. I stood on the veranda of the Empress's palace, gazing out at the calm, mirror-like waters of the Tay Lake, sighing at the monotony of palace life. From the corner of my eye, I caught sight of a figure sneaking furtively into the Emperor's sleeping quarters. It was Xue Elan, the woman who was no longer allowed to move freely around the palace. Oh, right. She was called Jiang Lena now. I had almost forgotten that she was still in the palace. A sudden surge of curiosity prompted me to follow her quietly. I shushed the palace maid standing guard at the door, stopping her from greeting me, then tiptoed into the hall. Suppressed sobs drifted out from the inner room. Jiang Lena's voice was choked with tears as she spoke. Your Majesty, that poisonous woman has seized control of the entire court. Are you not going to do something about it? I can barely protect myself, let alone seize power back from her. Chiku's voice was hoarse and weak. I had to move closer to hear him clearly. The rustling sound of fabric grew louder as Jiang Lena leaned in urgently. I will bear you a son, many sons. You once said that only our sons are worthy of inheriting the throne. Chiku erupted into a fit of violent coughing, his voice breaking as he spoke, now tinged with tears. Calm down, it's useless, it's all useless. I can no longer perform my marital duties. My days are numbered. Just 2 days ago, when I had attended to him in his bedchamber, Chiku's gaze had lingered on the half-worn lotus-pink undergarment I was wearing. You wore this dress back in Xuanyang, he had said. Why do you still keep it now that you are noble consort Shu? I had blown on the bowl of medicinal soup in my hand, replying lightly, old clothes are more comfortable than new ones, but people are always more drawn to what is fresh. Chiku had propped himself up on his elbows, letting out a helpless sigh. Are you making a dig at me? Are you still upset about me and Lena? Her position in the palace is now lower than yours. I have never neglected you because of her. She is all alone in this world. You should be more kind to her. Never neglected me because of her. I hadn't bothered to expose his original plan for the night of the coup. But did he really think he could treat me like a fool? Besides, Shuerilan had once tried to kill me, in Yuana's nightmare. It was because of her that my son and I had met our deaths in the palace. If it were me who was all alone in this world, and her who was attending to you in bedchamber, would you beg her to be kind to me? I asked, my lips curving into a faint, mocking smile. Chiku had downed the bowl of medicinal soup in one gulp, grimacing, it's so bitter, you never would. Even if I were to die with blood pouring from my 7 orifices, even if Yuana were to sicken and die in the depths of the palace, you would only reprimand her with a few casual words. Human affection is the most unreasonable thing in the world. But human affection is also the least important thing in the world. Betting one's life and future on the affection of a single person is a gamble that people like me, people who are insignificant and easily discarded, cannot afford to lose. Chiku's hand had brushed against my hair, trailing down the length of my hair to the tips. His breathing had grown heavy and labored, yet he had remained powerless, unable to do anything. I had rested my head on his chest, listening to his weak, fluttering heartbeat, and let out a sigh of relief. Chiku had pinched my chin lightly between his fingers. The Imperial Academy of Medicine is useless. Tomorrow, I will send for famous physicians from among the common people. Once I am cured of this illness, I will make you beg for mercy. It seemed that the famous physician I had taken the liberty of sending him was not as tactful as the imperial physicians. He had told Chiku the truth. Jiang Lena stared at him in disbelief, her voice rising in panic. No. If you can no longer perform your marital duties, then why keep me in the palace? How will I ever become empress and avenge my family? If you die, will Yi Qingshuang let me live? And that Ziyun, they will tear me to pieces. She stumbled out of the hall, screaming hysterically, her cries echoing through the corridors as she shouted about her father and brothers. The news of Consort Zhao's suicide by drowning in the lake reached me while I was preparing a birthday gift for Yi Qingshuang. Yu Ying led me to the Empress's palace. Yi Qingshuang was standing in a daze on the veranda, a yellowed paper-cut portrait clutched tightly in her palm. She turned to face me. Wiping her eyes awkwardly with the back of her hand, I had wanted to talk to her, but I was always so busy with state affairs. The dead deserve respect. Grant her a posthumous title of noble consort. A thought stirred in my mind. Yuana's nightmare had come true in the end, just not in the way he had imagined. Yu Ying hesitated for a moment before speaking up, and His Majesty, I heard that he fainted from grief upon hearing the news. Yi Qingshuang rubbed her temples, her tone sharp with impatience. Then send for the imperial physicians. I am not a doctor, I cannot cure him. Yu Ying nodded mutely and retreated. I circled around to stand behind Yi Qingshuang, massaging her shoulders with just the right amount of pressure. Your Majesty, you carry the weight of the entire court and the inner palace on your shoulders. With only Yu Ying and a few young maids to attend to you, how can you possibly take good care of yourself? Yi Qingshuang's eyes fluttered closed, and she let out a long, tired sigh. You're right, but I still have you, do I not? I leaned down, whispering in her ear. I only know a little about how to ease your burdens. I cannot truly understand your heart. Yi Qingxuang's eyes opened in confusion. Standing before her were 4 beautiful young women, each more lovely than the last. I had searched the finest pleasure houses in the entire capital, handpicking them just for her, women who knew exactly how to please a lady. When they had heard that they would be serving the empress, they had been overjoyed, eager to fulfill their duties. Whatever lingering affection Yi Qingxuang still felt for her old love would be forgotten in the time it took to finish half a cup of tea. I closed the door softly behind me, leaving them to their own devices. The evening glow painted the sky in shades of deep crimson and purple, casting a golden shimmer over the rippling waters of the Tay Lake as if nothing had ever happened. Mother, Yuana ran toward me, his face lit up with joy, fresh from his lessons at the Imperial Academy. Slow down, I said, hurrying forward to meet him, a smile spreading across my face. Slow down. We have a very long life ahead of us.